An ounce of prevention, as the saying goes, is worth a pound of cure. An emerging field of research is beginning to show why that's especially true when it comes to your genetic material. Dr. Elaine Chin works in the field of personalized medicine, and her new book helps explain the DNA of it all. It's called Lifelines: Unlock the Secrets of Your Telomeres for a Longer, Healthier Life. And Elaine Chin joins us now for more. Welcome.
Thank you.
I'm really excited to have this conversation because I had no idea what a telomere is. What is a telomere?
Well, the telomere is the tip of your chromosomes. So I'm going to use some props to help you.
Okay.
I know
You've got two X's, right?
Yeah, those are chromosomes, my dear. So one's from your mom,
okay,
one from your dad, and we have 23 pairs of that. You'll remember that in biology, right? Mm-hmm. So what I want to focus on is the very tip of your chromosomes right there. And I'm going to use another prop because it's easier to understand.
Okay.
And it's the shoelace. And that's, I've got a shoelace here, and here are plastic tips. Now, you'll know what the plastic tip of your shoelace does.
It's very important. It keeps your shoelaces from sliding out.
That's right. And it prevents it from fraying prematurely. Mm-hmm. So this is the same function of your shoelace tip is your telomeres. And your telomeres are there to help your chromosomes from prematurely raveling or from sticking together. Mm-hmm. Now, we all have a certain length of chromosomes that our parents give to us, so we can't fix that. But what we want to do is say, each time your chromosomes unzip mm-hmm. to be replicated the DNA so that we can make proteins to replace or repair that cell, a little bit of that telomere shortens. Now, how quickly or slowly our telomeres shorten is really dependent on multiple things. Mm-hmm. So one of them is the cause of healing, repairing, which is the damage from an incident or trauma mm-hmm. or from infections and illness. And then the rest of it's all within our control to a great amount, which is your lifestyle.
And I want to show another graphic, and
mm-hmm. it's
kind of an analogy of a dynamite stick.
Okay.
Can you explain that?
Yes. So what I say is that your dynamite stick, you can use a candle for a more subtler example, uh-huh. is that you still keep burning the wick and you get to a certain critical short length and kaboom. Now, our bodies don't go kaboom, uh-huh. but when we get to a critically short length with the telomeres, this is when trouble starts, and this is when we know scientifically that chronic conditions begin to appear, such as heart disease, complications of diabetes, cancer, arthritis, dementia, Alzheimer's, osteoporosis. So we want to keep people healthy mm-hmm. by slowing down the burn rate of your telomeres mm-hmm. and hopefully also lengthening them. And there are tricks on doing that as well.
I wanted to read you something here that's been written about telomeres. Mm-hmm. While shorter telomeres indicate biologically older cells, the process is not strictly chronological, scientists have found. Mm-hmm. Cells can age at different rates depending on the lifestyle of the body that contains them. What does that mean, that cells can age at different rates depending on the lifestyle of the body that contains them?
Yeah, so I'm going to use the car analogy. Now, I love slamming on the brakes. And that also burns the brakes, but also burns the tire. So depending on how you wear and tear your body will determine how quickly you wear and tear your brakes and the treads on your tire. I always say that when you have bald tires, that doesn't necessarily mean that immediately you're going to have a car accident, mm-hmm. but it's going to give you a higher probability if it's raining. And you slide, right?
So once you've had them tested, what should you do next?
Yeah, so that gives us a baseline. Mm-hmm. And it's a academic exercise, because what we want to be able to say is for a long time is that wellness activities in terms of improving things around your lifestyle, and we'll get into that, mm-hmm. is going to improve your longevity and your quality of life. And finally, I talk about telomeres because it won the Nobel Prize in 2009. So I say, well, what does Dr. Elaine Chin know? Because she's just an MD. But if the Nobel Prize winner says this is science, then I'm trying to say that wellness and having a healthy lifestyle, eating better, and all these things we're going to talk about is very important.
And if you find that your telomeres are shorter than what they should be, mm-hmm. Does it mean that you're going to get like a horrible disease like cancer?
No, and that's what the important part is that what we want to be trying to do is to try to slow down the burn rate, and increase the activation of an enzyme called telomerase, which helps to re-lengthen the telomere. So let's talk about a couple of ideas. So one area is diet. You know, we always have different diets, but let's talk about a diet that's important for telomere health. We want to make sure that we eat whole foods. So in other words, not manufactured foods.
Not processed.
Right?
Yeah.
And then we want to have more unrefined grains and less refined carbohydrates.
So not the fun stuff.
Well, processed stuff again. And then we want to talk about proteins and want to focus more on plant-based proteins and less animal proteins, specifically red meat. And then we talk about fats. There's good fats and bad fats, and we know that olive oil, avocados have great oils, but also fish have great omega fatty acids. Then we look at fruits and vegetables, all very important. And last but not least, our vices. We shouldn't smoke because it does shorten your telomeres, but we won't talk about that anymore.
How about chocolate?
Chocolate is an antioxidant. Yes, we can have that. And also alcohol. Alcohol, it's a dose-dependent issue. And caffeine, we want to put that into limitation.
How do you test for telomeres?
It's very simple. Depending on the lab, most people would do blood work, but there are now newer labs that will do it with saliva testing.
I wanted to read something that you write, and you write that obesity is by far the most serious public health concern of the modern industrialized world. This really surprised me. Why is it? Why is it so dangerous, obesity?
Because it's a precursor to leading us into a syndrome called cardiometabolic disease. And what that really comes down to is a couple of variables such as heavy weight, body mass around your belly, otherwise your waist circumference, and looking at cholesterol issues, specifically high triglycerides and low good cholesterol HDL, or your blood sugars being high and your blood pressure being abnormal. A number of these variables all are contributed by obesity.
So the idea is to live healthy and eat healthy. Isn't that what we've been hearing from doctors and medical science for years?
Yeah, so what I'm trying to say to people is like they say, well, that's what people say. What proof do you have that this really works? So I say the proof is in your telomeres, and it's Nobel Science research.
But if they're so important, I've never heard of them until I saw your book. Not to say that, you know, maybe I'm not reading enough. But if they're so important, why don't more people know about telomeres?
Well, this is why we're having this conversation. So we're going to educate a bunch of Ontarians about this now.
Right now, the average life expectancy in Canada as of 2012 is 81 years. And you write that we outlive our biological usefulness by about 40. So right now, we're doubling our time on Earth to 80, which kind of sounds great to me. Why would we want to live much longer than that?
Well, I would say that our family would like us to live longer than that. And I think what I'm trying to say there is that once we get to a certain age and we've what we call replicated or procreated, and
because that is our function.
That's our function. One of the aspects of telomeres, which is really interesting for me, is that people with life purpose have longer telomeres than those without.
What do you mean by that?
So it's about compassion. It's about doing things beyond the ability for us to deal with making sure we have shelter and food, but to do better things for mankind. So one of the things that I now reach out to do, and it's one of my favorite activities, is to support the WE organization, as you know, Mark and Craig Kielberger, and doing a lot of work to help third world countries, or shall I say developing countries, maintain a healthier lifestyle so they don't start getting into these habits that North Americans are starting to develop and have obesity, diabetes, heart disease, cancer. It's very costly to a society from a healthcare perspective.
I want to talk more about the cost in a little bit, but you're saying that when you do for others, it helps you live longer?
Exactly.
Why is that?
Well, I think that your telomeres say, wow, okay, you have life purpose to procure the longevity of the species, so you must have healthier telomeres. And your telomerase, your enzyme, will activate.
And the other part of this conversation, I guess, the youth aspect. It feels like we're already so youth obsessed. So isn't this another layer of prolonging our life and being focused on being young?
I think that baby boomers now saying, I don't just want to be youth obsessed, but I want to have quality of life. And this is talking about the development of chronic conditions. So we may be living longer, but unfortunately, as a society, we're having more and more chronic conditions as we age, and that's not good quality of life.
What kind of chronic conditions?
So we may not die of cancer, but we end up getting treated for cancer, and there may be situations where our functions are not as good. We may not have a severe heart attack or a life-threatening stroke, and we get disabled and have part of our body being paralyzed, being in a wheelchair, and then the whole other new aspect around dementia and Alzheimer's, and how can we prevent that, because it is an aging issue.
And it also affects your quality of life?
Yeah, absolutely, not just for ourselves, but also our loved ones around us.
You also write about personalized medicine. What is that?
So let's talk about personalized medicine, because it's something very dear to me. Traditionally, when I graduated from medical school, we talked about care plans. And we were really excited about it because we figured out how to operationalize healthcare. And that just meant one size fits all. And we come up with a plan for how to treat high blood pressure, how to treat diabetes. But what we're saying now is we have the technology and the know-how to understand what's the exact health action plan just for you, based on your genetics and your biomarkers and your lifestyle, and how all those things interact with your environment.
What kind of biomarkers? What are those? Can you explain those?
So biomarkers can be as simple as your blood pressure, your waist circumference, and it can get more complicated into understanding your genetics or your DNA, learning about your function around your hormones, and that's just not estrogen and progesterone, but your cortisol, your insulin, your growth hormone, and then understanding how well you are nutrient dense in your body. So you understand every vitamin, mineral, organic amino acid that's in your body, and seeing if that is jiving with your genetics and how you are eating your diet.
Why is that important?
Well, I'm going to give you an example, a very simple one. And omega fatty acids, we all hear, is found in fish. And we say, eat more fish because it's good for your brain, it's good for your heart. Now, how much is good for you? So you may decide today that after we have this conversation, you're going to have sushi. Maybe you're going to decide you're going to have it 2 times a week. And then somebody says, well, you know what, that's not enough. Let's take some omega fatty acid capsules. Now, what's right for you? In fact, we'll know by 2 things. One is to get a genetics test, which is called nutrigenomics, the whole area. And I can tell you whether or not you are better or not good at absorbing omega fatty acids. Now, if you're not good at it, then it means that maybe you will need more omega fatty acids from whatever source than somebody who doesn't. And last but not least, I can now measure from your blood your omega fatty acid levels. So that is a full example of personalized medicine.
That makes sense. I mean, we all have, we're made of different DNA.
Absolutely.
But why are we getting treated the same way?
Exactly. So we're way past that now.
Tell me about your practice. How does it work in comparison to like a regular OHIP covered GP that most of us have?
I'd love to have an OHIP covered practice, and for certain things I still help and look after people, but much of my focus is on personalized medicine. And today, the specialized tests such as omega fatty acids or even vitamin D, which we know many Canadians are deficient in, and you and I with darker skin in this lack of sunlight puts us at higher risk for not making as much vitamin D from lack of sun.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, so what we want to be able to do is to provide access to individuals to have that tested. Now, another great example that I like to use is in the area of drugs and medications. We know that every day, 2 equivalent Airbus full load of passengers every day has a drug complication.
Really?
Now, if you knew that, you wouldn't get on a plane if the plane was going to go down, right? So that's how many people every day across North America have a drug serious side effect. What we do have the technology.
Then why are we still taking these?
So we have to some degree.
Yeah.
But today we have the technology for a couple $100s to do pharmacogenetics. And by doing that, I can tell you which blood pressure medication would work for you or not work for you, which antidepressant would require a higher dose or ones that don't work for you. And to understand that means that you will no longer be a lab rat in the emergency department. And this is what I want to be able to bring to so many people today.
How much does that cost to get this personalized?
$300-400.
Which, so for some people, that's a lot of money.
It is.
Is that per test?
It is. Like, each test is a different variance. Like, I'm going to give you a very simple example is Warfarin, which is Coumadin. A lot of people take it because they have arrhythmias and they have to take this medication. Just getting a test to know what dose to start at and whether you need a higher or lower dose to prevent too much blood thinning or not enough to prevent a stroke is about $100, $65.
And I guess if you look at it the span of your life, it is something that it's probably you should invest in.
We know that the risk of getting a complication from warfarin side effects is a lot costlier as a society than to have every individual who's taking that get a genetics test for that.
How much does a telomere test cost?
A telomere test costs around $500, and I always say that for those who can't afford it, it's okay because the book talks about the science. I'm trying to convince people that the science is sound.
So Elaine, if I was to come to you and say I need a full workup for my telomeres, what would you do? How would you take it?
So what we'll do is we'll first talk about your lifestyle and your traumas and your health.
When you say traumas, what does that mean?
Some people have had a car accident. That would really create a different issue around how we're going to look after you because likelihood of your telomeres shortening more or earlier than others would be problematic. So it's as simple as getting a telomere test, which is about blood work and saliva. But what I always want people to consider is that a telomere test alone will give you a point in time. And what we want to be able to do after that is to say, where can we target to help you understand what we can do to help improve the health of your telomeres. So we might want to talk about, should we look at understanding your omega fatty acid levels, your vitamin D? Should we look at getting you a personal trainer to get you going, or is it signing you up for yoga classes? So we want to be holistic about the approach beyond just getting a telomere test.
Do you think the cost of the test is what stops it from being incorporated into everyday use, like for GPs?
I think the everyday use should be having a conversation about the fact that teaching people how to stay healthy and how to do it is grounded in good science.
But if we had a more personal approach to medicine, where would we get the money to pay for it?
Yeah, so the challenge of today's healthcare system is that we're back-end loaded, looking after people's acute illnesses, chronic conditions, and end of life. And so it's going to take a shift in conversation about spending some dollars in the front end of our lives when we're still healthy and to do all these diagnostics. Now, who pays for it is really a political issue, whether we self-pay or insurer pays or even an employer pays. Maybe that's where we're going to have to move, because the good news is employers are now starting to look at health savings accounts to help bridge the gap.
And speaking of employers, you are TELUS's Chief Wellness Officer?
Yeah, I've got 2 day jobs, and that's my other day job.
What does that mean, Chief Wellness Officer?
People often say to me, what are you doing in a telco company? Well, the good news is that I'm there because I'm trying to leverage what I've learned my lifetime in practice to bring that knowledge, information, and the tools and technology to more Canadians. Now, why TELUS is because TELUS is, in fact, many do not know, the largest health IT company in Canada. They've invested year to date over $1.6 billion in health IT technology. So I just want to bring that technology and use that to leverage it, to bring it to you and to your viewers, personalized medicine.
But what do you do there?
So my job, there's a couple of them. One of my primary jobs is to make sure that we endeavor to have the healthiest team members and workplace globally. Now, that means that we want to bring the best wellness programs to our team members so that they understand the importance of things like staying active, eating healthily, being mindful. Today, we also have technology of apps that we can turn on a yoga practice, or you can do a meditation by learning and understand that there are a lot of technologies that are available that we can do it at home or at work.
You mentioned that TELUS has spent $1.6 billion over the last 10
years. How long TELUS Health has been around, yes.
That's a lot of money.
It is.
Why is wellness important to a telecommunications company?
Well, I think it's driven from our president CEO, Darren Whistle, who says that healthcare transformation, which means we have to do health a little bit more differently to engage more Canadians, is the single most important and the biggest social challenge of our lifetime.
In the book, you write about your parents, and it was, I felt it. Did they inspire you to do the work you're doing?
Well, my father is a teacher, and my mother was a medical social worker. And they've inspired me to first educate and to reach out to help others. So I can't think of a better time in my life right now, doing that in my practice and doing that in an organization where I can put those two things together.
And you write that your parents had medical difficulties.
Yes, so my mother, by the time she passed away, had 4 bouts of cancer. And so I recognize that I'm at risk, and it so happens by understanding my genetics, I do have some risk factors that are higher than others for developing cancer. So it helps me understand that I need to be proactive. And what does that mean? That means that I'm screening more regularly. She died of colon cancer ultimately. She had breast cancer. And she also had some nasopharyngeal type of tumors. And all those things are interrelated with how we interact with our environment. So we know that barbecued foods and burnt foods give us higher risk of colon cancer. So the barbecue is not really part of my lifestyle. We know that alcohol increases every woman's risk for developing breast cancer. So that just becomes, I just become a cheap date at most dinners. But I will drink a glass of wonderful, good champagne.
And
so
dessert?
It's quality, not quantity. Yeah. Well, the sugar I can get away with because I exercise, so we can do that. But it's just being aware. And I think to people is that it's important to understand your risk factors so that you can be proactive about it, because death and dying, when you get there, is 100%. It's not reversible.
And I think we live in a society where age is so important, where people ask you, how old are you, how old are you? Do you think that if people knew their biological age as opposed to their chronological age, they would actually take better care of their health?
Yes, I think so. And I love you bringing that up, because when my clients do their telomeres, now the ones who don't have great telomeres don't say that. So they'll walk around and say, I have telomeres of a 9-year-old, and what's yours?
Yeah.
So it's much more proactive to be able to say that, and to some degree, when you know that your telomeres, compared to the other people of the same age and gender, if you're lower in the percentile along that continuum, then you need to pick up your socks and just kind of get onto it and start scaling the bad lifestyle things.
And the other thing that you wrote that I thought was really interesting is that we're born to die. Like the minute we are born, our cells start to die. Do you think that if people knew more about what was going on in our body, we would take better care of it? Because I mean, you talked about barbecues, and everybody does barbecues in the summertime.
Yeah.
It's like you cannot have a barbecue.
Yeah, as a mom now, my son's 18, I have a wish that we start educating our kids in kindergarten. And that through our children, in fact, they educate so many adults. And that is where we should start in our schools to educate. And we're now educating Canadians, and that's my mission in life now.
What do you think the odds are of the medical system changing to become more preventative as opposed to reactive?
I'm really hopeful, because we're starting to see that not just in Canada but globally. And you'll hear about that when President Obama started a whole fund on personalized medicine. You'll see that in the UK on teaching kids how to get healthier and to have a whole program about preventing childhood obesity. So I am very hopeful that we are well on our way to educating Canadians. And what I think now is that with the advent of the internet, people are reading and people are learning, and they will figure it out, and I'm very hopeful.
And it's one thing to be passionate about a subject, but to want to write a book about it. What inspired you to write this book?
I wrote this book because I was truly inspired by my clients, and they all said, you need to write a book because you need to show everybody that it's grounded in science, and by helping people read it and to transform them from an understanding of, well, maybe it's voodoo, to, well, it's based in Nobel-winning science. Will shift the conversation from, well, it's not going to work for me, to it will work for me because I know my telomeres and I know my genetics and I know my biomarkers.
And what do you say to somebody who says, you know, it's too late for me, I've not exercised, I eat terribly, my telomeres are probably 200 years old, there's no point?
Yeah, well, this is where I say, sorry, good luck. That doesn't work, because in fact, there's a study that shows in my book that exercise is more helpful for telomere health later on in your life. So in fact, it's never too late to start. And people always say, exercise, what does that mean? From the context of the book and telomeres, it just means that you need to be active 30 minutes every day. And that doesn't mean that we need to go into a gym and kill ourselves with interval training and a trainer that's going to beat us up for 30 minutes. That's optimal, but just getting out at lunchtime and walking for 30 minutes and having a wearable to know your steps and to know that the minimum number of ideal steps is probably around 6,000, but we want to keep improving it. If you're at 2,000, get a goal to 3, and 4 to 6. So you're just aware of your activity. Get up every 90 minutes and do a little walk around your desk.
And it's never too late.
It is never too late. Your telomeres will love you for it.
Well, thank you for being here and helping us understand telomeres. It's been a pleasure.
My pleasure.
Help TVO create a better world through the power of learning. Visit TVO.org and make a tax-deductible donation today.